Let's see. We are going to unmute our panel. So we've got Michael Funk, who played General Knox. We've got William Robbins, who played, ooh, ask to unmute. There it goes, who played Talmadge. And we've got our star, I guess, yes, we'll call him a star. Our General Washington, Dan Shibby, he is also here as well. And our director, Alex Olson. Yes, yes. Yay. What did you guys think? Let's have the first question. What did you guys think of this?
Amazing job.
It was, it's very interesting. It makes me kind of sad not to be there, of course, but under the circumstances, it was wonderful to be in there in any way we could. But, you know, there's something about being in that room. You feel the weight of what went on there, what it's seen. And just even seeing the room again right now, it kind of gets me a little bit misty and missing y'all.
I know this would have been your 4th year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
4th year.
And Alex, what was it like to actually film in a period room like that? Because I don't think you've ever taken on a project like that.
It was incredible being in that room and working with all these amazing actors. And also just taking on the challenge of COVID and, you know, how do you take something that has, you know, that is supposed to be filled with people and strip it down to just people. And I think that's sort of what we were trying to go with shaking hands with all of you here on Zoom.
Definitely very interesting to not have a crowd of people to do it with this year after many years of just opening up the doors and me and Dan just doing this, to having a very small audience and then sending it out to almost 200 of you, it looks like. Yeah, 150 people, which is very exciting. Let's get to these amazing questions that are coming in. Jeanette asks, when you do your reenactments, do you use scripts or do you use improvisation based on what you know about the characters you portray?
All depends on who they're asking.
It's for everybody. I think that's an everybody question because we've got a.
All right, I'll throw out there first then. You read as much as you can. You generally have a good notion of some of the quotes that they would have said in whatever circumstance you're in. But from there, that's where it really becomes historical interpretation. You become the person who is translating this person's life for a modern audience. And so, yeah, it's a lot of improv, if you will, with a huge amount of information in the back of your head. You have to kind of think as the person, not only how they would answer a question, how they felt about something, but you have to know, you know, as much peripheral information as possible down to who your cousins are and who you met with on what day or what time, and trying to get that whole life, you know, to come across in a short amount of time.
Oh, Joyce asks, is the in-person event, excuse me, as brief as the video? Yes.
Well, no, because
the speech is itself, but
we do a Q&A afterwards, always. Yeah, and that usually takes a good deal of time and gives us an opportunity to really flesh out the scene more and talk to people more. But it was a brief, you know, it's very brief in Talmadge's memoirs.
Yeah, but the speech itself, I think everybody expects Washington to speak for hours and hours and hours at this farewell. And it's like, nope, he really said goodbye. That was it. He had things to do, places to go. But the lead up to it was everybody was in the room. They were drinking a little bit. It was a very limited amount of people in the room. I think everybody forgets that this truly was the end of the war. The army had been disbanded at this point, and he had who he had left, which, I mean, is something that I continually try to research as to who was specifically in the room, because only one person decided to tell us that maybe 4 people were in the room, but I know that there was more. There's always more people in the room.
Yeah.
Dr. Hrinko, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, asks, how do you deal with questions that include events that have not yet happened when you are portraying a specific event or date?
you kind of have to play it off that it hasn't happened yet. Forget the term, but you have to play stupid. I don't know what you're referring to.
I get that a lot portraying, past presidents and things, because I, like a lot of people, don't portray beyond my age, which is about 40 years old, and most presidents were presidents, later than that. So I get asked things about things that haven't happened yet in that person's lifetime, and that's exactly correct. I just, what are you talking about? Louisiana Purchase, Louisiana for sale. That sounds interesting. And you can play with it and do a little bit of foreshadowing and inject some humor into that effect. But otherwise, Michael's exactly correct.
Yeah, my favorite question is when they want to ask something about how you died. That's do I seem unwell to you? But it depends on where you are and what the situation is. For years, of course, I had people telling me that I couldn't trust Benedict Arnold. And it was hilarious because at some point you kind of want to look at him in the eye and go, okay, I'm not him, right? Because, they get so involved that they're like trying to warn you, no, you've got to be careful about Benedict Arnold. He's going to turn. And, you're arguing, you should not speak so ill of General Arnold. He has given us great service and has suffered much in this conflict.
That's the most nice answer I've ever heard about Benedict Arnold. So I appreciate that one. I kind of love this question. Miles asks, are the wigs comfortable?
Never wear one.
They're comfortable if you have a good one. I have to wear a great many deal. And as you can tell by this video, that Talmadge hair, who did not wear a wig as far as I could tell, at least not during the war. So unfortunately, I have to usually don prosthetic hair pieces. So I wear them quite often. If you purchase and or craft ones of quality, then they fit quite well and they're quite comfortable. And if not, then they are uncomfortable. However, I prefer the former.
Michael, how's your wig?
Well, I do have to say, thank God for your wife who helped me with my wig a lot. These things are not meant to be worn if you actually have a head of hair.
Right.
Okay. And they do get very hot, even in the wintertime. So they're better suited for people that are bald as opposed to a full head of hair. They can be uncomfortable. They look cool. They look the part, but they can be annoying. Let's just put it that way.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone refer to a 18th century wig as cool before.
They're warm.
I always enjoy watching everybody kind of like before every take. It was just like one of these.
Yeah.
Just like, is it on straight? Is it on straight? Willie B asks to George Washington and the director, would you like to get in a small boat and cross the Hudson in November?
I'd love it. I'd love it for the sake of this. Yeah, absolutely.
I would be bundled up, but yes, it would be great.
All right, guys, watch out. Things can happen with enough grant money.
I would like to say, though, James Monroe was there across the river first.
This isn't about him tonight. It's about Washington. Montina asks, what other kind of reenactments do you gentlemen do? What other characters do you portray outside of Free?
I'm a one-trick pony. I do Washington, and I've done exclusively Washington for many years now. But Bo,
This is where Dan is very, very lucky because he gets to portray one person. I, on the other hand, have portrayed, I met him portraying Thomas Jefferson. I've done Southeastern Native portrayals of the 18th century. I currently also do James Monroe, Patrick Henry, and several others, and several more in development as well. Currently working on a John Paul Jones portrayal.
Ooh.
So unfortunately, I think I've had to diversify a little bit more, but it keeps me on my toes and it keeps me very, very busy.
Michael, do you play anybody else?
Only Knox right now, because I don't necessarily do a whole lot of first person stuff. Mine is generic with the living history that I do. I started as a light infantryman in a dragoon unit. Here's my helmet from back in the day. And now I'm a captain in the West Jersey Artillery Company. And for my gunners that are on here that I know you're here, it's our feast day, St. Barbara, the patron saint of the artillery, December 4th. So happy feast day to all of you. So those are the two that I've done over the years. Knox is a new adventure for me.
Interesting.
How'd you get roped into doing Knox?
I asked him.
Yeah, I got a phone call or an email out of the blue. And yeah, it's one of those things. It's like a government job, like you got to know somebody.
So the side story that we're not mentioning here is that the first time I ever had opportunity to appear as Washington at France's Tavern, I was told that there was a man outside in uniform. And since I'm Washington and I should know all the officers, I asked really quickly, can you go back and ask him what his rank is and if he's someone of name, you know, so that I know who he is. And they came back and said, he's an artillery captain, but he doesn't have a known name. And I said, very well. So I was able to greet him when he came in. And that was the first time I met Michael. And so, you know, he's, you know, you never know when you show up to something like this, what it could all lead to.
Yep. Well, we took pictures with you, and this is a picture with Ian from that day.
Yeah.
A few
Where's the
years
frame?
ago.
Where's the frame going of me?
Oh, wow.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I saw Ian's one here somewhere. So there's a picture of me and him from one of the farewell toasts.
That was a fun year as well. That was a lot of crazy. That was us rotating 2 Washingtons in and out of the room every half hour. And it was more strategic work than I think I've ever done for a farewell.
Yes, you can't have 2 Washingtons meet on the stairs.
Yeah, it was. And then the 2 of you were in the same room at the same time. And I thought like the universe was going to explode, like 2 Washingtons in the long room at the same time. I was like, something must be broken. We've hit a wormhole of some sort. That was a fun year. Alex, did you ever think of becoming a reenactor after this experience?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna put it on the reel and we'll see. But yeah, it was really cool. You know, getting to do this and being in that room in particular, because usually it's all the work is in making everything look authentic, and when it's just laid out in front of you, you can just really focus on the aspects of cinematography that you want to be spending your time on, not tinkering with everything else. So yeah, it was a great experience.
We gave you the room. What did you guys learn about this experience? Did you guys know about France's Tavern before you came? Were you aware that we had this event? What really pushed you into becoming those people before we started rolling?
Well, for me, it was definitely Dan, who I have been friends with for a number of years. But of course, it was my first time meeting and working with you all. So I knew a little bit about his previous work with France's Tavern. This was my first time, and my first time to New York City, actually, and since 1986. So that was somewhat exciting. I knew nothing almost about Talmadge. I think you all approached me in late summer, August, something like that. And so I had maybe a couple months of preparation time, not including, well, the uniform for one was one issue. The other was learning about Talmadge and doing the research himself. Most of that research was consumed by the uniform, which was also quite unique, because usually at an event or something to which I'm asked to do it's very vague about the context. And rarely do you get an event which has such a specific context as December 4th, 1783. So that was excited because I could the question was at that point, what was Talmadge wearing in 17 and 83 on December 4th? And I went from there. Of course, history doesn't leave us a record of exactly what he was wearing at that time and date, but it gave me at least a pinpoint to aim for, a very specific point to aim for. And that's unique and helpful, actually. But that's usually the exception rather than the rule.
Loved that uniform that you made. It was awesome. And thank you also for not saying all of your information came from Turn. Colin, our wonderful FTM staff member, asks, do you have any other memorable responses during your interactions with guests at the previous farewells? This is for Dan specifically.
Oh my gosh, they're countless. They're countless. You know, there's been so many times that I reach out for someone's hand to shake their hand. And I try very much so whenever we were doing this event. I always try and look into their eyes as if I'm saying the things we've seen together. And while I may not see you again, thank you. And so I try and give it all that. So there's been so many times I've come up to these, you know, grown men that are weeping when I reach for their hand. And it you know, it's setting me off because I know at that moment they're not dealing with me. That's not about me. That's about Washington, and that's about them. The other times that just get me so much are the kids. We've had some amazing, amazing kids, including one
Last
that, like,
year, the Schuyler sisters showed up.
Schuyler sisters showed up last year. They were adorable. And then a few years back, there was a young man who showed up and he asked me if I was going to be president. And I said, or if I was going to be first president. And I said, I assure you, the Congress has already had its first president in Peyton Randolph. And he said, and he looks up at me, and I'm used to nobody having a clue what I'm talking about at that point. He looks up at me and he says, Peyton Randolph was the first and third president of Congress. And I went, are you my child? You know, it was amazing. And, you know, this kid was so in that moment, he was so delighted to be meeting General Washington that's one of those that you go, oh, I'll never forget that. There was another young man that was there a number of years back that he had a very emotional response and just reached across and grabbed the general's hand and held my hand as the general. And it was like, wow, there was a connection there that was intense. So those are wonderful. I mean, so many experiences there that are amazing, but those are just some of the standouts.
Yeah, but I always love watching everybody shake your hand as the officer and watching their reactions and watching people become so overwhelmed. And I think I've just been working here so long that sometimes I've just become desensitized to it, that when that happens, it puts me back into, okay, this is really important. I need to remember it. And I snap back into it. And I'm like, oh my God, they're really weeping. Like they are truly the officers. So when we made that shift to do digital, to film this, it was important for us to still be able to break that fourth wall and have you reach out to your officers as you would have if we were all in the room. And I think Alex did a great job in figuring out how to do that. And it worked out really well. And I think that's my favorite part of that whole film.
Yeah, that was an easy thing to figure out for a filmmaker. And he really did reach out there for that. So that was great stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. One of my favorites. For everybody who's asking questions, Ambrose, who's answering back to you, is our museum whiz. He is wonderful and knows all the things, and somebody I often go to for answers on Francis Tavern history. So he is a trusted source. I see him typing away these amazing answers for questions that I cannot get to. Let's see. Dan, is it true you were the same age as Washington was at the farewell?
Yeah, this is the year, and it's been
year.
exciting. I started portraying Washington when I was a few years too young to be General Washington, but I lived in 1775 for a few years, and then I've aged with him. That is not something I'm able to do as much as my job has recently shifted, that I'm having to do all eras of Washington more than I used to. But this was a big year for me because I was really looking forward. I am the same age, 6 months off, but I am the same age as Washington would have been. And that's something I think it's really easy to forget. You look at the white hair and you think, oh, old men. And it's like, I mean, I am certainly older than when I started this journey, but Washington wasn't, seriously old or aged. He certainly wasn't decrepit. And so it was really exciting for me to have been through this whole journey and then to be able to say that farewell at the age that he was, and to get it on film. That, how extraordinary is that? What, that's one of those things that's like,
You did it.
that was, so I have special thanks to Mary for making that happen, because that was extraordinary.
You're gonna make me cry again.
And Mary, I'd just like to take this moment to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
That's the magical wine glass, by the way, from the set, so that we could be safe while we were in a historical location.
Yes, as our curator was screaming at us, absolutely no liquids are allowed in the room. We had to come up with our own liquids. When did everybody start reenacting? How did you get into the history of the 18th century? What brought you here, essentially?
Well, what brought me here when I was a little boy, it was the tail end of the bicentennial. And my parents would take me to events here in the tri-state, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware area. And like I said, it was the tail end of the bicentennial. It was the early 1980s. So 200th anniversary events were still going on, and it was a big deal. And it fostered a love of history that my parents would take me to these places. And especially being here in South Jersey, in close proximity to Philadelphia, the cradle of the revolution here, there were a lot of things going on. And then I started reenacting in 1995. I was 18 years old, and I got recruited / suckered. The recruiting officer grabbed me at Fort Mercer at the Battle of Red Bank, and I got inducted in the 4th Continental Light Dragoons, and we took it from there. And then over time, my father got suckered into it, so it's kind of like it's a family affair there. There's Dad and Mom. So
that's awesome. Dad
followed me into it, and he's still doing it today. And it's tough to describe the experience. It gives you a great deal of satisfaction. Just being able to grasp the history. Like, I could stand in the long room where we filmed and be completely content to sit there for a half an hour to an hour by myself in complete silence, just to grasp the feel of what happened in here. So.
I feel the same, and I've been here for years. What about you, Bo?
My experience was very similar to Michael's. I encountered other historical interpreters as a youth, and that's probably what got me interested in history. Of course, when you grow up in the East Coast anywhere, you're subjected to usually older history, at least going back to the 18th century, maybe even older, depending on where you're from. But that's what kind of spurred me into wanting to become a historian. And then friends around high school and shortly thereafter who were involved with it got me into it. And then I went on a long hiatus. You get married, you have a family and a job and obligations and responsibilities, and that sort of pursuit kind of takes a back seat. And then about 10 years ago, I found myself in a different situation where it looked like it was something I wanted to get back into. And I jumped back in with both feet, started researching, and I've been a historical interpreter ever since.
For me personally, I did not start out to be an interpreter. I didn't set out to be an interpreter. I did have background doing some acting and other things like that. I was not a tremendously good history student as a young man, but after 9/11, I kind of got this interest in my head, saying, what is it? What is it about this country? What is the story? And I decided, why don't I know more about the story? And I ended up starting a educational foundation to educate more people about it. And I saw first-person historical interpretation. I said, this is the most amazing system if you will, for getting, or the most amazing vehicle for educating people swiftly and engaging them in stories that could otherwise be really dry or boring. If it's just read on a page, sometimes it's very flat. But there was this opportunity to engage people and bring things to life and make them flesh and blood stories. And shortly after I was asked to portray Washington, I had someone advise me on getting in touch with the man that was the most well-known historical interpreter of Washington, which is Mr. Dean Melissa. And he gave me some great advice in the beginning, and that started me down the path. And for many years, I did speaking and things like that without doing any of what you would call reenactments. And then I got invited to be on the field. And from there, things kind of took off. And that was about the same time as I was fortunate enough to be called in to be the historical advisor to Ian Kahn, playing George Washington on Turn. And so I took all this information that I'd spent years accumulating and worked with him on that. And so while I'm talking with him in that, I started actually doing field work, if you will, and events that were much more related around battlefields and things that I hadn't done before. And it's grown and it's grown. And, that's led me all the way to, fortunately now, I've had the great honor of portraying Washington at Mount Vernon since July 4th of this last year. And, I don't think there could be a bigger honor in this portrayal than to be able to do that. So, and along the way, one of those reenactments that, of course, made such a massive impact on me was this one, because I knew very much about the history, but to actually be invited to participate in it was huge. And again, that worked out because of the connection through Mr. Ian Kahn and Turn. And so I'm very, very grateful for that opportunity. And so that really, that's funny because that's kind of the thing that moved my interpretation east, because I'm a West Coast person by birth, and that's where I still live today. And so I'd done a huge amount of Western states work, very little Eastern states work until then. And now I'm working more in the East than I do in the West.
It's for the good of all revolutionary causes. It's fine.
I mean,
no, it's not bad at all. I love it.
Yeah.
I too moved back east because of it. And, it kind of all goes back to Turn, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It is definitely funny when you see photos from Dan as Washington from Breeds Hill Institute events in California, and there's palm trees behind him. And it's a full battle scene, but there's palm trees, and you're just like, it takes a second for your brain to recognize that that's wrong, but you're also just like, history is accessible. It doesn't matter where you are.
Right,
as long as you've got a cannon and a general, you've got to reenact it.
Yeah. Well, it's that also when we do in Arizona, every now and then someone will get a picture of General Washington with a cactus behind them. It's like, oh, that's way out there, but
It works. It's fine.
We're all Americans.
Yeah. If I've learned anything is that at least the children who come to the museum learn more while in character. So when we have them dress up as Talmadge, they really start understanding what it is that I've been spewing at them for the last half hour. And they actually start understanding that this crazy lady might actually be making sense in a little bit of a way. So it is good. Donald asked a wonderful question. Have your reenactments changed your views of Washington or others? So as you've started to get into these characters, do you find yourselves looking at these men differently?
you certainly gain more respect. The whole saying, walk a mile in my shoes. Sometimes just standing out in Virginia heat in a wool uniform can change your perspective. Or on the flip side of that, in the middle of winter, trying to be outdoors and imagine that there is no indoors for you, that you will be camping and sleeping outdoors. It does certainly, there's a physicality that brings a different kind of respect. But even more than that, I think the research, as you research these people, very human people, right? They're not perfect and they make mistakes and they do things wrong. But what they accomplished and who their core characters were just tend to impress you more and more as time goes by. So I've ended up with more respect for General Washington than I ever could have imagined when I started this, partially because I've had to put on, those boots more than once and be out there in those situations. But it is an extraordinary journey, that's for certain.
And yeah, I would second that, especially, and I'm sure Michael could add to this, because when I heard there was going to be a Knox interpreter with us, I was extremely excited, because you take a guy like Knox, and who had such a profound impact, not only in the war, but on early American statehood and government.
Yes.
And you look back at him and you're like, wow, he was actually kind of a really unassuming guy at first.
Yeah.
But he stepped up. And I think Talmadge was the same way. When I started reading about Talmadge this summer, he was, we know he was a cavalry officer. He was a head of Washington's spy ring. But he did a great many other things during the war too that surprised me. And in fact, some, borderline piracy of taking over some merchant ships that were trading with Britain, and assuming you're commandeering the goods and things like that. It was very John Paul Jonesian stuff that he was engaged in, not only just on horseback, but even on the rivers and the seas a little bit. So it was just very, very interesting how these guys who, in the case of Knox, a book salesman, in the case of Talmadge, he was a school teacher after Yale, and they just really stepped up and just accomplished extremely impressive feats without, any real military training, without any real military experience. They created and forged this army from literally nothing almost. And that's what really strikes me as important to remember about these lads, that they really came a long way in a very short period of time.
That was being part of the West Jersey Artillery, being in the artillery company. I had a little bit of knowledge about Knox. Anybody that recreates Revolutionary War artillery is going to know about their commander. But the enjoyable part for me was doing the actual research on the man himself. Between his stature, the fact that he was missing a couple fingers on his left hand. I'm glad you didn't ask me to conceal that in the film, because I wasn't going to cut off 2 fingers for you. Sorry.
Maybe next year.
But the fact that he was a self-made general, little to no military background, militia type service, but the things that he pulled off, Washington needs artillery at Boston. It goes all the way to New York and hauls these cannons back in the middle of the winter and pulls off this feat just because the general needed it and it had to be done. And the fact that he started basically our first military academy in the United States at Pluckerman here in New Jersey. He started an artillery school. Things that the man had definitely vision of what was necessary and what we needed to actually win the war. And the other thing is, when things drop off after the war, for me, it was interesting when I was researching him to find out, yes, he took over as commander-in-chief after Washington resigned for a little while, and then he was his first Secretary of War. So doing a little more research on him when he was Secretary of War, going to the War Office in Philadelphia by Carpenter's Hall to go see that.
And at Francis Tavern.
And at Francis Tavern as well, correct. That's a period that it's not spoken about a whole lot. There are things out there, and got me a chance to do a little more reading on him. So, but it was great researching his character. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to have to do that.
Oh, I can say thank you to all 3 of you 1,000 times over for helping us expand on having people in the room, because it's always kind of been our dream to expand it, to have a Talmadge in the room, to have a Knox in the room. And as we can find more reenactors who are willing to play people like Kosciuszko and we are allowed to have more than 3 people legally allowed in the room after COVID, will be a wonderful treat, of course, if we are allowed to touch anything in that room, because it is historic. We do our best. What was your favorite part of filming? Because this was a different experience for all of us. Alex's head is going.
I'm thinking.
It is
Well, Alex did the brunt of the work. I'll say that. He was busy bee that day, and he's so good at his job. And to go back to an earlier question about Alex possibly becoming a reenactor or living historian, I almost never say this to anybody, but I'm going to say to Alex, don't. You're too good at what you do, and I would like to see him behind the camera. I think he's much more useful there. Capturing what we do and being able to disseminate that to a larger audience, especially during times like these. I think that was the best part of filming, working with others like Alex and of course, Daniel, Michael. Those two really brought the emotion, which got me going. And they made it real for me. So it made it easier to step into that character.
Yeah, and thank you so much, and it was really great working with all of you, and especially just the way you had all of your lines down so well, and you're all 100% in it all the time. So it's the sort of thing that's what I struggle with in my work all the time, is working on those details of it. And you all gave amazing performances, and it allowed me to focus on the other aspects that are churning through my head of exposure and composition and movement of the camera and things like that. So that was a great experience.
Fighting the emergency Con Ed machine that parked right outside the window in the early hours of filming and asking them to please move.
Yes.
Brought us right back to 2020.
Yeah.
I will say my favorite moment of the whole day is just a combination of when Dan would walk up to the window and he would chuck his hat, and it's just like, it's on a B-roll of just like that thud over and over and over again, just to make sure that we had gotten the right angle from it. And it was just, it made the whole day a little bit lighter, because I knew we were filming something under a time constraint during a pandemic, and it was just like thud, 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 and we would just giggle and laugh. But
I'd have to second that, because every time he walked in, we did that, I almost like looked at Michael like, are we in trouble?
because he walked in so serious, as the general would have on that day, and it was just something that helped diffuse such a heavy moment for us for about an hour. Lives rent-free in my mind. Diego asks, how did everyone, including the staff, prepare for the filming of the wonderful video? How long did the post-production and editing take? We prepared on the staff, I'll start June, when we realized nothing was going to change. We were still in full COVID-19 mode. We, at that point, weren't even sure if the museum was going to be opened. And sometime in June or July, we kind of sat down and we said, okay, what are we going to do? We have to do something. And Sarah, Allie, and myself floated around a bunch of different ideas. We went back and forth, and we were like, why don't we film it? We've never done that before. I think we can maybe swing that. Maybe we can just not sneak everybody into the building, but maybe we can do this. And it was working with Dan, who I know was starting at Mount Vernon and wondering if you were going to be able to get on an airplane and come join us in New York City. And what else can we do? And it had grown from there of like, well, we can get Dan. Can we get a Talmadge? Can we get a Knox? Who can we get in the room? And then we stopped and we were like, oh, wait, we need somebody to do this for us professionally because none of us know how to do what Alex does. And it spiraled in from there. And it was just that first hour of like, we started at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 7 a.m. We started really early. And Bo was the first to join us that day for all of the scenes downstairs in the Talmadge room in the restaurant. And it was like, I took a deep breath and I said, we did it. We did it. It took a few months of planning, but it worked. And I am so proud of the team that we worked with for helping put this together, because it felt crazy to say that we could do this in June. And here we are on December 4th. Granted, we're all in our homes, but we did do it.
Mhm.
We did do it.
Yep. I think I had the easiest job of anyone, because I was literally like the last one on set. I was in New York for under 24 hours, because we flew in from Virginia to there to do that, and then flew from there out to California that evening. And so you guys all made it very, very easy for me, because everything was in place. Everything had happened. You guys knew what you were doing. Alex knew what he wanted. And Alex, I've worked with enough people in Hollywood over the years that I can tell you, they don't all know what they want. So I really appreciated that. But yeah, everyone, it was like, I know there was probably chaos behind the scenes, but it felt very well oiled from where I was looking. So for me, it was, very, very easy shoot and very fun.
Yeah. I think on my end, there was probably one stressful day of pre-production, of getting everything together, and having to really think through, how can I do this, by myself with one assistant, and do all these different jobs that typically there are, tons of crew members for. And how do you move about these rooms where you can't touch anything and you have to be as nimble as possible? And those are all challenges that I love, and in some ways helps you think more creatively. So once we kind of built out these these systems to be like, okay, we're gonna light with one key light, and we're going to, like, I literally had mapped it out and knew where and how we were going to block everything, just so we would be able to do this in that time frame. And thanks to everyone on the team for providing all that information, so we could plan it all out. And we even finished early, I think, maybe an hour earlier than expected. So
It's like we were efficient.
yeah.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap up on our last question. It's an all answer question, so everybody's going to answer this one.
Mhm.
If you were going to dine with anybody at France's Tavern, who would you dine with and why? And none of you are allowed to say George Washington, because that's too easy. Sorry, Dan.
Wow.
Got to keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
I think homage, just to just to be able to hear more about what he saw that day, and try to get out more of the details. And this is a very short scene, and that's kind of all we have to go by. Just to hear more of what he was thinking when he was sitting there writing that book.
Michael?
I'm going to have to say Knox. And kind of just like how Alex just answered the question, I would want to dine with him and just ask him, did I get it right?
Yeah.
And if I didn't, tell me what I did wrong.
Yeah.
Bo?
Alexander McGillivray. But of course,
Ooh.
this is kind of off the wall, but Mary knows what I'm talking about, because we've been exchanging research notes about this. He was actually a Creek chief from Alabama who came to New York in 1790 to sign the first treaty with the constitutional United States government in 1790, the Creek Treaty. He was actually my first portrayal, somebody for which I actually sought out and said, I need to tell this guy's story. Every other portrayal I do, with few exceptions, is just somebody says, hey, we need you to do this, and it's not my idea. But the story of Alexander McGillivray, and especially his time in New York, is just something that people need to know about. And of course, we know for a fact that he ate at the City Tavern, which would have been a few blocks down. However, during his time in New York, during that delegation, his son, his nephew stayed with President Washington. He himself, he actually crashed at Knox's. But you can't tell me for the many weeks that he was there, the City Tavern was the only place that he ate.
No, he.
So I'm still we haven't been able to stick a scholastic needle in, pinpoint in the documentation, but I'm still certain he ate at Francis Tavern.
We're working on it.
And yeah, he was just a very interesting guy that a lot of people don't know about. We think of the 18th century native as being very primitive, but he actually had a 1/8 silent partnership in the largest trading company in the Southeast. He had 3 plantations, a couple wives. He had commissions both from the British military, the Spanish military, and there in New York was commissioned as a brigadier general commissary, honorary commission that was bestowed upon him. So he was kind of a cool dude.
All right, Dan.
Yeah, I'm going to go in kind of a weird direction. Honestly, I think from my historical mind point of view, I would want to eat with Sam Francis, because there's so much information. There's so many gaps you could fill in. And the man knew everybody. He was connected to everybody, and he had a pretty good sense of who they were, or they wouldn't have continued to have been patronizing his business so much. He was very much so a man who understood the people he was working with, and they trusted him. So I would love to sit there and have conversation with him. I think no one better than a innkeeper, a tavern keeper, to actually discuss all the other characters of the day and what's been happening and how he viewed things. Plus, I'd know what he looks like.
Yep.
That'd be huge.
We'd know so much more if we can just sit down with this man from 300 years ago. No big deal.
One dinner. One dinner's all we need.
Just one dinner. That's fine. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. I am going to pass over our microphone to, where is he? Our director, Scott.
I got him, Mary.
You found him?
Yeah.
All right. He's
Well,
going to give
thank you
us
everyone for being here.
closing words
Thank
for
you.
us.
Hi, everybody. Again, thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm Scott Dwyer, the director for Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York and Francis Tavern Museum. First, a big thank you to Mary and all of our staff for putting this amazing program together. Thank you to the cast and crew for your portrayals, your professionalism. We couldn't have asked for anything better, particularly this year when a remote production was the only thing that we could do and share it with not just the people who could come to the museum, but people all across the country. Thank you for tuning in. Programs like this aren't possible without our many supporters, individuals, institutions, our museum members. Thank you so much for your support. Also, a big thank you to Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York, who own and operate Francis Tavern. December 4th is a very big day for us. Not only is it Washington's farewell, for which Francis Tavern is known, but it's the day that the society meets for our annual meeting. So everybody's dialed in to the program tonight, and we'll be dialing right back into our meeting to finish the rest of the year's business. The Sons preserved the museum and Francis Tavern in 1904 after 200 plus years of the building going through many iterations. After it was a tavern, it was the first home of the State Department, the Department of War, the Department of Treasury. It became a boarding house, it became a warehouse, and it was on the eve of destruction when the Sons came in, preserved it, rebuilt it to look like it did when it was at the height of its use for Washington's farewell, and have maintained it since then. As we've all been remote for so long, it is so important to realize that actual physical buildings are so important to tell the history of our country and of the major events that have shaped it. So preserving Francis Tavern is critical to our educational mission, and that requires time, it requires resources of individuals and institutions. So again, thank you for support. After tonight, tonight's our big night, it's the big farewell, but we do programs all year round, remotely and hopefully again in person. So please tune in to all of our events, both remotely and come to the museum. We're back open. So please come visit us, come see our exhibits. And again, as the actors and our staff have said, being in the room, being in the physical space, there's nothing like it. You really feel like you're right back in 1783. So again, thank you for everybody's work and for participating again tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. This was wonderful. So nice to see everybody, not in character.
Yes, so thank you all for joining us. I hope everyone has a good evening, afternoon, if you are in a different time zone. Hopefully we will see you all soon.
Thank you all.
Night, everybody.
Bye.
Good
All
night.
right, everyone. Take care.
Good night.